My son stood in the doorway of my kitchen on a Tuesday evening in February, the kind of cold that settles into your bones the way only a Canadian winter can. He did not take off his coat. He did not sit down. He stood there, with his hands in his pockets, and told me, in a voice so calm it frightened me, that I needed to co-sign a $280,000 line of credit against my house, or he and his wife would be moving out and taking my grandchildren with them. He said it the way you might tell someone the highway is backed up tonight, matter of fact, decided. Like the conversation was already over before it began. I was 63 years old. I had lived in that house for 27 years. I had shoveled that driveway alone for 4 of them after my husband passed. I had painted the front door red because Gerald always said he wanted to and never got the chance. And my son stood in my kitchen in his winter coat and told me what my house was going to be used for. I did not say anything right away. I put down the dish towel I was holding, folded it over the oven, handle the way I always do, and I looked at him. He looked back at me with an expression I did not recognize on his face. It was not guilt. It was something closer to impatience. His name is Daniel. He is 41 years old. He is my only child. I want to tell this story the right way, because it did not begin in that kitchen. It began 2 years earlier, when Daniel and his wife Nicole first asked to move in. Daniel had been running a renovation contracting business for about 6 years at that point. The first few years went well enough. He had a crew, steady contracts, a decent reputation in the Kitchener area. Then the supply chain issues hit. Then 2 large clients walked away from contracts mid-project, and then a subcontractor he had trusted with a significant deposit disappeared. Daniel was not reckless. He was unlucky in the particular way that small business owners sometimes are, where several bad things arrive at once, and there is no cushion to absorb any of them. Nicole worked in property management. She was organized, confident, always had an opinion about how things should be done. I had never been close with her. We were polite to each other in the way that 2 people are when they both love the same man but see the world very differently. She called me by my first name, Margaret, from the very first time we met, which I did not ask her to do. I never said anything about it. I should have understood then that this was how Nicole operated. She moved into spaces and made them hers. When Daniel called me in the spring of that year and asked if they could stay with me for a few months while they sorted out the finances, I said yes without hesitation. He was my son. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, Abby, who was 7, and Owen, who was 4. I have a 4-bedroom house. Of course I said yes. They moved in on a Saturday in April with 3 carloads of boxes and a U-Haul trailer. I had cleared out the 2 spare bedrooms and set up the small one off the hallway as a playroom for the kids. I thought it would be temporary. I thought 3 months, maybe 4. That was 22 months before the evening in February. The first few months were genuinely fine. We found a rhythm. I made breakfast early. Daniel was out the door by 7. Nicole worked from home 3 days a week and was in the office the other 2. The children were in school and daycare. I helped with pickup twice a week, made dinner most evenings because I liked doing it, and honestly because the house felt warmer with that kind of purpose in it. After Gerald died, the quiet had been the hardest part. It was around month 4 or 5 that I began to notice things shifting. Nicole started buying groceries and reorganizing where things went in the kitchen. I did not say anything the first time. It seemed harmless. Then she moved the furniture in the living room, said the old arrangement blocked the natural light, and I told myself she had been cooped up in the house all day and needed to feel some agency over her environment. I understood it, even as something small in me resisted. Then she started talking about the basement. My basement was unfinished. Gerald and I had always talked about putting a proper family room down there, but we never got around to it. It had my storage, my holiday decorations, Gerald's old workbench, boxes I had not opened since he passed and was not ready to open. Nicole mentioned once that if we finished the basement, the kids could have a proper play space, and she and Daniel could have a home office. I said that sounded like a big project. She said she had already gotten a quote. I remember that moment clearly. She said it so easily, sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop, like she had already decided, and was simply informing me. $52,000, the quote, for my basement. I told her I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I decided against it. When I told her, she nodded and said she understood, but the way she looked at Daniel across the dinner table that evening told me she did not. After that, something changed. It was subtle at first. Nicole became less warm, less conversational. She stopped joining me for the cup of tea we had fallen into the habit of having in the evenings after the kids were in bed. Daniel became busier, more distracted. If I said something at dinner that Nicole disagreed with, she had a way of going very quiet and then changing the subject, so that the silence felt like a correction. I started feeling like a guest. By the time we reached the following autumn, I was tiptoeing in my own home, not in a dramatic way, in the quiet, daily way that happens when you begin to second-guess yourself in your own space. I would hesitate before turning on the television in the living room in the evenings. I would start to suggest something and then stop. I began spending more time in my bedroom than I had since I was a teenager. I told myself it was just the adjustment of sharing space. I told myself a lot of things. Then October came, and Daniel sat me down at the kitchen table and told me about the business. He laid it out honestly. I will give him that. The line of credit was maxed. 2 projects had gone over budget significantly because of rising material costs. He had a large commercial contract coming up in the spring, a real one, the kind that could turn things around, but he needed capital to carry the crew and supplies through the winter. The bank would not extend further credit without collateral. Nicole's income was covering the household, but was not enough to bridge the business gap. He needed $280,000. He needed it secured against my house. I asked him what would happen if the spring contract fell through. He said it was not going to fall through. I asked him again, what would happen to my house if the business could not repay the line of credit? He looked at the table. He said the bank would have a claim against the property. I am not a woman who cries easily. Gerald used to say I cried at the right things and saved it for when it mattered. I did not cry at that kitchen table. I told Daniel I needed time to think about it. He said he understood. He reached over and squeezed my hand, and for a moment he was my boy again, the one who used to fall asleep on the couch with his head on my lap watching Hockey Night in Canada, and I wanted so badly to say yes, simply because of that. I called my friend Patricia the next morning. Patricia has been my closest friend since our children were in primary school together. Her husband was an accountant. Patricia is sharp and practical, and she does not say what you want to hear. She says what is true. She said, Margaret, you cannot put your house on the line for someone else's debt, not even your son's. If that business fails, you have nowhere to go. I already knew that. I needed to hear someone else say it. I also, quietly and without telling Daniel, called a lawyer. Her name was Susan Park, a woman about 15 years younger than me who had been recommended by someone at my book club. I told her the situation. She walked me through what co-signing a secured line of credit would mean. She explained it plainly and patiently. She also told me about something else, something I had not thought about before, and that conversation changed everything that came after. I did not give Daniel my answer right away. I told him I was still thinking. This was not entirely untrue. I was thinking constantly. I was thinking while I made breakfast, and while I shoveled the walk, and while I lay awake at 2 in the morning, listening to the wind coming off the fields behind the house. What I noticed during those weeks was how the pressure was applied. It was never loud. Nicole was never cruel in a way I could point to directly, but she began mentioning, in passing, how hard it was raising children in a rental market. She talked about how Abby had asked her once why they did not have their own place like her friends at school. She mentioned, more than once, how important stability was for children. She would say these things, and then smile at me and go back to her laptop, and I would sit there with the shape of the words settling into me like stones. Daniel started looking tired in a way that was directed at me. Not the tiredness of overwork, which I knew well on his face, but a different kind, a waiting kind. One evening in January, Nicole asked me directly what I was worried about. She said she could understand that it felt like a risk, but that Daniel had a plan, that she had reviewed the numbers herself, and that sometimes family had to show up for each other in meaningful ways. She said the word family slowly, the way you might underline it. I said I was still thinking. She said gently, but without breaking eye contact, that they had been patient. I almost laughed. They had been living in my house for nearly 2 years, in bedrooms I had cleared and furnished, eating dinners I had cooked, and she was telling me that they had been patient. I said I appreciated that, and I went to my room. And then came February. The evening my son stood in my kitchen doorway in his coat and gave me the terms. He said he and Nicole had talked it over. If I was not willing to support the business in this way, they felt it was probably best for everyone if they found their own place. He said they had found a rental in Cambridge, available March 1st. He said he hoped it would not come to that, but that Nicole was struggling with the uncertainty and the kids needed a settled environment. And then he said, the part that I have turned over in my mind 100 times since. He said he hoped I understood that if they moved out, things between us would be different for a while. He said he just wanted to be honest with me. I stood there in my kitchen in my socked feet with the dish towel over the oven handle, and I looked at my son and understood something I had been refusing to understand for months. This was not a request. It had not been a request for a long time. It was a structure. Ask, apply pressure, raise the stakes. And at the center of it was the assumption that my love for him and for those grandchildren would eventually outweigh my own judgment. I said, Daniel, I need a few days. He said, okay. He went upstairs. I heard Nicole's voice, low behind the bedroom door. I did not sleep much that night, but I was not panicking. I had already, as it happened, done what needed to be done. 6 weeks earlier, during that first conversation with Susan Park, she had raised the question of whether I had any estate planning in place. I did not, beyond a will that Gerald and I had written years ago, and that was badly out of date. She suggested I think about a revocable living trust, the kind that would allow me to transfer the house into a trust with myself as trustee, protecting it from certain claims, while still giving me full use and control of the property during my lifetime. It was not a complicated arrangement. It was actually quite straightforward, but it had to be done before any lien or encumbrance was placed against the property. I had signed the trust documents 4 weeks before that February evening. My house was no longer legally available as collateral for any debt. It was held in trust. It could not be signed over, claimed against, or leveraged without a formal legal process I was not going to initiate. I had not told Daniel. I want to be clear about why. It was not strategy in the cold, calculated sense. It was that once I understood what was being asked of me, and what the pattern of the last 2 years had actually been, I did not feel safe having that conversation while they were living in my house. I did not know how Nicole would react. I did not know what it would mean for my relationship with my grandchildren in the short term. I needed to be standing on solid ground before I said anything at all. In the days after Daniel's ultimatum, I made phone calls. I called Patricia and told her everything. I called my cousin Diane in Halifax, who had a spare room and who I had not visited nearly enough since Gerald passed. I called Susan Park and told her I was ready to have the next conversation, and I called a moving company, which felt both dramatic and entirely practical. Daniel came to find me on the fourth day. He knocked on my bedroom door in the evening, which was unusual. He normally just walked in. He sat on the edge of the chair by the window and asked if I had thought any more about things. He looked genuinely tired. Not the pointed tiredness of January. Something more real underneath it. I told him I had thought about it a great deal. I told him I was not going to co-sign the line of credit. He closed his eyes for a moment. He said he had figured as much. I said I wanted him to know that I understood how hard the last couple of years had been. I said I knew he was not a bad person. I said the business problems were real, and the pressure he was under was real, and I did not blame him for trying. He said quietly that it put them in a very difficult position. I said I understood. I said I also needed him to understand something. I told him about the trust. He did not react the way I had prepared myself for. He went very still. He asked me when I had done that. I told him. He sat there for a long time, and I watched him work through what it meant, what it had meant all along, that there had never actually been anything to sign over. He asked me if I had known, when he came to me in October, that I was going to do this. I told him no, that was the truth. I had not known in October. I had known by December. He said he needed to tell Nicole. I said there was something else I needed to tell him first. I told him that I had booked a flight to Halifax, that I was going to stay with Diane for a while, that I had spoken to a moving company about putting some of my things in storage and having some of my furniture brought up to Diane's, at least temporarily. I told him that they were welcome to stay in the house until March 1st, which was when they had said they had found the rental available, and that after that I would be reassessing what I wanted to do with the property. He asked me if I was leaving because of him. I said I was leaving because I needed to. I said there was a difference, and that I hoped someday he would understand it. He left the room. I heard voices behind the bedroom door again, and this time I did not try to make out the words. I flew to Halifax on a Thursday morning in late February. Diane picked me up at the airport, and we drove to her house along the water, and she made tea, and did not ask me to explain everything right away. Just let me sit there and look out at the Atlantic and breathe. I had not breathed properly in a very long time. I want to tell you what happened after, because it matters, and because I think people who have been in similar situations deserve to hear that the story does not end at the airport. Daniel called me 2 weeks after I left. It was a short call. He said they had moved into the Cambridge rental. He said Nicole was upset. He said he was, too. He said he did not fully understand what had happened or how things had gotten to where they were. I told him that was a start, not understanding, that there was room to learn something in that. He did not say much after that, but he did not hang up either. We stayed on the line for a little while, not talking, the way we used to when he was a teenager and had called me from a payphone after a party that had not gone the way he planned. He called again a month later. That call was longer. He said he had been thinking about the last 2 years from the outside, trying to see it the way I might have seen it. He said some things that were hard for him to say and that I had needed to hear for a long time. He did not blame Nicole entirely, and I did not ask him to. There was something more honest in that. Nicole has not called me. I do not expect her to, not yet. That is not the shape of where things are. I hold some hope that it will change when enough time has passed. I hold it loosely. I have been in Halifax now for almost 2 months. Diane and I go for long walks along the waterfront. I have been to her book club twice. I have cooked dinner in a kitchen where nothing is, where I would put it, and I have not reorganized a single drawer, because it is not my kitchen, and I know the difference. I have spoken to Abby on video call 4 times. She showed me a drawing she made at school of our family. I was in it, in the corner, with red hair because she has decided I have red hair, even though I do not. Owen waved at the camera and then immediately lost interest and wandered off to find something more compelling, which is entirely correct behavior for a 5-year-old. My grandchildren are all right. That matters more than I can say. I am not sure yet what I will do with the house. Susan Park has given me options. I could return, I could rent the property, I could eventually sell depending on what I want the next chapter to look like. I have not decided. I have noticed that not deciding right away is something I am now able to do, which was not always the case. Gerald's red door is still there. The moving company put my most important things in storage, but I left most of the furniture, the dishes, the things that make a house feel inhabited. The house is still mine. It was always mine. What I want to say to anyone listening who recognizes some part of this story is that the moment I should have paid attention to was not the February evening with the ultimatum. It was much earlier. It was the first time I hesitated in my own living room. That hesitation was information. It told me that something had shifted in the way I was being related to, and I let months go by before I acted on what I already knew. Love is not a leverage point. It should not be the mechanism by which someone extracts what they want from you. A son asking his mother for help is one thing. A son presenting his mother with consequences is another. I know the difference now. I think I always knew the difference, and what I had to learn was that knowing is not enough if you do not act on it. The trust that protects my house is just paper and filing and a notary's stamp. The trust I am slowly rebuilding with my son is something else. It will take longer, and it cannot be drawn up in a lawyer's office. But I have time. I am 63 years old and I have time, and I am sitting in Halifax looking at the water, and that is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, whether it is a house or a savings account or a retirement fund or simply the right to move through your own home without flinching, I want you to hear this. Your discomfort is information. Your hesitation is information. The moment you start asking yourself whether you are being unreasonable in your own home, you already have your answer. You are not unreasonable. You are paying attention. That is the beginning of everything.